Hello, my name is Dr. Jacqueline Renishek. I'm with DTP Leadership Group. This is Hot Topic Bold Talk. And I welcome you to this podcast. The title of it is The Tide is Turning. Americans, courts, and even Republicans are finally saying no. And I'm sure you'll be glad to hear that. I'm going to give you some wonderful examples. For the past few years, honestly, many Americans have watched the events that have been unfolding. And the polls show us how little support Trump has at this point. And there's no question in my mind that anyone is finally deciding, okay, am I going to stand up? And that is now happening. Some have wondered about the courts. We have a problem with the Supreme Court, which you well know, but some of the courts are still standing up, even about gerrymandering. They tried to do something with the Alabama gerrymandered map, and of course, the Supreme Court reversed their decision. But there are courts that are still standing up and doing things that don't have to go to the Supreme Court and can make a major difference. Some of us have really wondered about Congress. Will they stand up? Some have wondered about what are the ordinary Americans going to do to make a difference? And we have a powerful difference that we can do in our voting, and we're seeing it already. Well, this week I want to talk about something we haven't discussed nearly enough. That's people really standing up. I've been trying to give you a bunch of examples, but today there's going to be a lot of them. Across the country, voters are speaking out in the primaries. Organizations are fighting back in the courts. Democrats are developing strategies for the future. Artists are refusing to be at the political July 4th event at the White House. So they're not going to be political props. They're just flat not going to do it. And perhaps the most surprising of all, even some Republicans are pushing back against Donald Trump. It may seem like I'm going to be giving you separate stories. They are very much connected. Together, they tell us some important things. The tide may finally be turning. So I want to talk about some thoughts I have about our democracy and the resistance. I think I've said over and over again, one of the most dangerous things that can happen to our democracy is when people become convinced that their vote does not matter. People want to know their vote matters. Authoritarian movements, they depend upon fear and resignation and intimidation and silence. And that is what we do not want to do. Now, for much of Donald Trump's career, many Americans have felt very disturbed about what was happening with him and what he did in each administration. Every day, we see things that I think are outrageous. Another attack on a democratic institution, like the Southern Poverty Law Center. They are probably one of the finest centers we have that keep us in touch with all the white supremacist groups. So, of course, Trump is friends with a lot of the white supremacist groups, so he's decided to attack them. And there's no ground to the suit that's been filed. Another effort to concentrate power in the hands of one man is very clear. Another a threat against political opponents, which you've seen he's preventing them from coming back to Congress. Journalists or universities, immigrants, judges, or anyone who dares to challenge his administration. But there's something much more important that has been happening in recent months. The tide is beginning to turn. Across America, voters are speaking out. Activists are organizing. Democratic leaders are becoming aggressive. courts are rejecting constitutional actions. Advocacy groups are winning important legal victories, which I'm going to talk to you about in this podcast. Cultural figures are refusing to participate in the events that they view as political propaganda. But perhaps the most surprising of all is there are Republicans that are now beginning to push back when Trump's demands become too extreme. And the significance of these developments cannot be overstated because democracy survives, because leaders are always good, but because leaders are willing to defend the democratic principles when leaders fail. So today we're going to witness a lot of examples of that in this podcast. I want to start with the courts pushing back. One of the most encouraging developments has been the growing number of legal challenges against actions taken by Trump's administration. Now, Public Citizen has constantly filed suits against him and is winning a lot of them. But they report that they filed the first lawsuit against Trump's second administration literally 1 minute after he was sworn into office. Since then, the organization has filed dozens of lawsuits challenging actions that they believe that violate federal law. Now, these lawful representation by the public citizen are lawsuits that represent far more than legal disagreements. They represent one of the most important things that we see, and that's the principle of American democracy. No president is above the law. Whether he thinks he is or not, he is not. So public citizen represents what I would consider to be many of these cases challenge the actions that they believe exceed executive authority or that violate requirements that have been established by Congress. So the organization's leader acknowledges that not every lawsuit succeeds. Some are won, some are lost, others remain pending, and they keep fighting. That is exactly how democracy is supposed to work. The courts examine evidence, judges evaluate the arguments, and then legal principles are applied. What matters is that there are still institutions willing to challenge government actions rather than simply accepting them. And perhaps one of the most recent and significant victories involved a federal judge rejection of the Justice Department's efforts that critics described as a politically motivated fishing expedition. This case involves some actions taken by the Department of Justice in Maine, and voting rights advocates celebrated the court's decision as a major victory for election integrity, civil rights, and constitutional protection because they won that case. Every single successful legal challenge sends an important message to government agencies that they cannot simply do whatever they want because they happen to have power right now. Power remains subject to law. Power remains subject to law. So the principle is the foundation of our constitutional democracy. Now let's go into some of the Republicans that have started resisting. Perhaps the most surprising development has been the emergence of resistance from within the Republican ranks. For years, many Republican officials appeared unwilling to challenge Trump, regardless of how extreme his positions became. Fear of political retaliation is exactly what they feared, and we see some of the results of his retaliation because some have lost their position in Congress. But recent events may appear where the wall of loyalty is breaking down. One of the clearest examples is when congressional Republicans joined Democrats in opposing a proposed $1.8 billion payout fund connected to Trump's immigration agenda and paying back some of his friends. And according to the report from the Washington Post, the administration ultimately abandoned the plan after a revolt from Republican lawmakers. So they're finally saying, it's enough. You're not going to do this. You're not going to bid $1 billion to pay off your friends and do something else with immigration. We're not going to have it happen. And I think this is the significance of this development. We cannot ignore it. It is a very strong statement. Now, this is not Democrats defeating Trump. This was Republicans deciding they could no longer support a particular initiative, and the administration backed down. The fact that the White House retreated demonstrates something critically important. Political pressure still works. So your vote counts. When enough elected officials object, even powerful administrations must sometimes change course. And another example in the House is they voted concerning military action involving Iran. According to the New York Times, a bipartisan coalition voted to end military involvement, with several Republicans joining Democrats in a rebuke to Trump's position. Again, the numbers may not be overwhelming, but the symbolism matters. Every Republican willing to cross the lines of parties weakens the myth that Trump commands unquestioned loyalty. Every act of bipartisan resistance demonstrates that constitutional responsibilities can be more important than partisan allegiance. And that's what we need in our democracy. Now, there's some challenges in this particular one, because the House, we can see if we can get it past the Senate, which is going to be another thing. But then, of course, the bill has to be signed into law by Trump, and he's not going to want to do that. But there are many ways to pressure him. And that's what the Republicans are now doing with the Democrats. Here's another thing that's interesting is the Democrats and the way they're organizing for the long haul to get back in control of the Congress. The resistance is not simply about opposing harmful policies. It is also about building alternatives. So Democratic organizations around the country are increasingly focusing on long-term structural change rather than short-term outrage. One example comes from Arizona, where Democrats have highlighted the extraordinary imbalance in legislative success between Republicans and Democrats. According to a recent analysis, only a small percentage of legislation passed in the state legislature originated from Democratic lawmakers, despite Democrats represent millions of Arizona residents. Whether one agrees with every Democratic proposal or not, there seems to be a major problem, and the issue is representation. So democracy functions best when multiple perspectives are received and considered, and that's what's not happening in Arizona legislative system. So when the legislative body becomes dominated by one party, which we have nationally and we have it in some of the states, many citizens understandably feel excluded from the governing process. That's very evident with the gerrymandering and the African American communities. It's outrageous what happened, and it's continued to happen. This strategy, of course, The Democrats are organizing because they are building majorities at local and state levels, and they are constantly winning at local and state, and they're moving right on up into national government. The strategy recognizes an important truth. Politics change does not begin in Congress. It does not begin in Congress. Change does not begin in Congress. It begins with yours and my communities. Because what our communities do, it begins in our school board, it begins in city council, it begins in government, county government, it begins in state legislatures and grassroots organizations. And when it starts there, then it builds momentum and it takes away the power of someone that wants to be an authoritarian. Now, we all have to decide we're going to participate in this process. And certainly I'm doing my best to participate by providing these broadcasts and then voting and then doing what I can in my community. But here's some other things that you need to know about. Americans are using their voice. Resistance is not just limited to politicians and lawyers. See, the actors and the performers and the cultural leaders are refusing to support the July 4th event. They don't like what's going on and what he's doing, and they're not going to support it. The Washington Post recently reported that more than half of the performers scheduled for the major patriotic, quote, event on the National Mall have withdrawn from participating. They will not do it. Their reasons vary. Some cite political concerns, others cite threats and safety concerns. Regardless of their individual motivation, the withdrawal reflects a broader reality to all of us. Americans are increasingly unwilling to remain silent when they believe important principles are at stake. Freedom of expression includes the right to participate. It also includes the right to refuse to participate, as these entertainers have. Both forms of expression really matter in our democratic society. The growing willingness of public figures to take visible stands reflects a broader national mood. It is time to stand up and stop what's going on. People who once remained silent are increasingly speaking openly about their concerns. So that's what is happening that creates such an a really amazing difference. Now there's the economic question and what Americans are asking. Because another growing concern with the public involves economic equality. And it right now is economic inequality. While families are struggling with housing costs, healthcare expenses, education costs, and inflation, the wealthy continue to concentrate among a small group of individuals who are benefiting from what is happening. Recent commentaries, though, in several articles highlight proposals aimed at ensuring that the wealthiest Americans contribute more to the public systems that help make their success possible. There's a law that is coming out and will be voted on in California, but there are other states that are looking at what's happening with those who have a tremendous amount of wealth. It's not really a discussion about taxes. It is about fairness. What about all the rest of us that are not a part of the 1% that have the wealth? Americans increasingly realize that democracy becomes fragile when economic power becomes too concentrated. When you and I, as ordinary citizens, realize that we have to apply the same guidelines to the wealthy as we do to everybody else, or our democracy will erode. So the growing public conversation about wealth inequality reflects broader concerns. And it's really addressing who's accountable for all this. Where is the fairness? Where are the opportunities for all of us that are citizens? These concerns cross along ideological boundaries. We may have different ideas, but many of us are talking that have different ideas and different perspectives, and some of us are from different parties. These concerns cross all the things we've been talking about because they start asking us, where are the boundaries for the ordinary American versus those that have the wealth? And I know many Americans disagree or have other issues that they're really frustrated about. But what we are seeing that many are favoring limiting the power of those who have wealth. So why is this such an important moment? Taken individually, these stories would seem like they're not that important. A court ruling, a bipartisan vote, a policy retreat, a lawsuit, a group of performers withdrawing from an event, a grassroots organization and its efforts, but together they show us something that is much larger. They are revealing to you and me that society has begun to push back. Authoritarian movements depend upon the appearance of inevitability. Well, it's not inevitable anymore because there is resistance to what is happening. So courts are finally functioning. Now we have a problem with the Supreme Court, and it's tragic. But there are, as I said again, there are cases that don't have to go to the Supreme Court. They stop in certain federal courts, the decisions. Advocacy groups are fighting more than ever. Citizens are organizing. Democrats are developing strategies that are much more meaningful to try to deal with the factions in the Democratic Party so that we can all function together. Republicans are occasionally breaking ranks. And I respect those individuals that would not invest. One of them particularly that would not invest in gerrymandering in Indiana. And he's a Republican. I respect him for having done what he thought was the right thing for his state, even though he lost in the primary. But there are cultural leaders making independent choices. Most importantly, all of us have to start paying attention to what is going on. That's another reason I do the podcast. That combination creates the possibility of meaningful democratic resistance. So what's the lesson here for us? History teaches us that democracy rarely disappears all at once. It's when we allow democracy's principles to erode, when we allow violations of corruption that we have seen to continue. Silence is something we can no longer accept. Democracy is preserved through countless acts of resistance, accountability, participation, and courage. Every citizen who votes contributes. Every organization that files a lawsuit contributes. Every elected official who places principles above their party contributes. Every journalist who reports the truth contributes. Every individual who speaks out contributes. Democracy survives because people decide it is worth defending. Now, what is the work ahead for us? No one of us should assume that recent victories mean the danger has passed. Many of the challenges facing American democracy remain serious. Political polarization remains intense. It is the reason we often cannot talk to each other and come to some better solutions. Disinformation remains to be spread. Efforts to expand executive power continue. Threats against democratic institutions persist. The work of protecting democracy is never finished, no matter who's in office. But recent events provide reasons for cautious optimism. They demonstrate opposition exists. They demonstrate that the institution still functions. And they demonstrate that citizens like you and me care. Most importantly, they demonstrate that action can provide results. The central story of this moment is not Donald Trump. It is not the Department of Justice. It is not the Congress. It is not even the courts. The central point of this story is you and I that represent the American people and all the rest of us that live in our country. So it is a growing number of citizens refusing to accept that their voice does not matter. It is a growing number of organizations willing to challenge abuses of power. It is a growing number of elected officials recognizing that loyalty to the Constitution is much more important than loyalty to one individual or to their party. The tide is turning, not because one person is saving the democracy. The tide is turning because thousands and millions of Americans are doing what democracy requires. They are speaking. They are organizing. They are voting. They are protesting. They are litigating. And they are participating. So our history is repeating itself and shows us when enough people decide to stand up, even the most powerful leader discovers that that power is limited. That is the promise of democracy. That is the lesson that I think we have in this moment of time. And that is why Americans who care about freedom, fairness, accountability, and the rule of law should never underestimate the power of their own voice. Thank you for listening to me.